The ones putting the labels on so-called black people and Muslims are mentally ill people, because the same people who run the government run the mainstream media. They run your university systems. They run the dialogue. They run the narrative of Hollywood, of television. So we are underneath a mentally ill cloud of mind control. And the thugs of our society are only really thugs because they are subjected to a mentally ill society. The so-called terrorists of our society are only really terrorists because they are subjected to a mentally ill society. The same mentally ill society that thinks war brings peace, that imprisons the entire population of melanated people, genocides an entire race of people in Australia, Native America, South America, Papua New Guinea. The list goes on and on and on of the genocides and the massacres carried out by mentally ill people. The labels that are generated to distract from this mental illness are labels like thugs and terrorists. And as long as you have more thugs and terrorists out there in the mainstream focus, then nobody will really pay attention to the mental illness. But when you look at the deceptions of heliocentrism, white supremacy, the illusion of authority, the public education system, the criminalizing of plants like cannabis, psilocybin mushrooms, ayahuasca, and the list goes on, and the decriminalizing or actual amplification of prescription drugs, actual poisons, alcohol, cigarettes, you will realize that you are underneath a mentally ill society. Not that long ago, it was legal to lynch a so-called black person because you assumed that they did something, and you wouldn't get prosecuted for that. Until we realize the mental illness behind particular ancestors making those calls, we're not going to really change anything. Because their design is to make you not realize that mental illness. The mainstream dialogue is designed to avoid it. That is the mental programming. That is the mental illness. The status quo is to ignore that information in order to maintain the foundation of the Western society as we see it today. Your modern society was built on genocide and massacres. And you think people are going to be surprised that it's continuing on today? Or at least the illusion of that is continuing on today to maintain power over you? To maintain this illusion of authority? So you can see how all of these storylines that exist to protect this system are a reflection of the foundations of this system. Colonialism, Western society as a whole, that includes the racial so-called cleansing of the primitive and savage people in the so-called New World. They are going into Iraq and Iran, Syria, Libya for what? Resources. What do you think they were doing when they came to the abundant lands of the Native Americans? Oh, they were just settling. They were on a pilgrimage. No, it's the same mechanism. They were looking for land to control, resources to control by any means necessary in order to maintain the mind control of power. They have to tell you that they brought the slaves over. Any black people in America are African Americans. We brought you over here. We did. The reason why you're in the New World is because we brought you here. Yeah, we enslaved you, but look, now you have a computer. What are you, ungrateful? These are the storylines people don't want to look at. They don't want to talk about that shit. They just want to move on. You're still talking about slavery? You're still talking about genocide? I have an iPod, a laptop. You should just move on. Today's society is about innovation. This is why everything is dumbed down with comedy. This is why you are desensitized with comedy, with Hollywood, with your relationships, with your culture, with your food, with your water, with your education. Everything is dumbing you down and desensitizing you. And as long as you're in that dumbed down, desensitized state of being, you can't make any rational, spiritually, intellectually, or physically rational decisions with your life. Because your life, your perspectives, your so-called critical thought is not yours. It's based upon a society that's been systematically dumbed down, that plays small ball every day. They're taking this shit one day at a time. Why do you think every day it's all focused on Trump, 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 Trump? What did Trump do? That's just dumb, 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 dumb. What did dumb do? Every day, something dumb. It's kind of like the polar opposite of the hope that was installed with Obama. Obama was active hope in your reality. It was in your face. So it was another version of dumbing you down. You didn't do anything because your hope was in the individual. The smartest, the most reliable, apparently reliable, believable president out there. So that was a way of dumbing you down after the dumbass George Bush. Now you have the polar opposite of that. And that hope space needs to be filled by the system itself, the society. Because you have no structure. You have nothing to lean on with your so-called president. Now you have to have the hope built up by comedians. Little politicians here and there that give you a little sprinkle of hope. TYT, the so-called aggressive progressives, Alex Jones, they are the gap fillers for the emptiness that you now have. And Trump maintains the distraction and hopelessness because what are you going to do? You did what your so-called leaders told you to do. You voted. As if it matters in the first place. You voted, and look what happened. Racism as a weapon is a strategy. Heliocentrism as a weapon is a strategy. False flags as a weapon is a strategy. If you're not disassembling the strategy, if you get caught up in the movie line of the strategy, then you won't realize the mechanism of the strategy in the entire series. So while they're hitting base hits, you're analyzing how the batter swung the bat, how the pitcher threw the ball and how he could have done differently, how all this other shit. You're not looking at the strategy of the game, the strategy to win the series. Do you see the mechanisms that are being used to maintain chaos, to maintain your distraction from realizing the system itself? Think of all the thoughts that were going along when JFK was assassinated, when 9/11 went down, Sandy Hook, Gulf of Tonkin, Pearl Harbor. Same mechanism, different day. Who still owns these military bases? Who owns these oil fields? Who owns the Federal Reserve? Who owns your little funky ass in your workplace environment? Does it only relate to race? No. Was race used to build this empire? You better fucking believe it. A lot of these individuals, and I'm speaking generally, really can't entertain a lot of this information because this information involves looking at oneself, like changing oneself, looking at like your yourself in relation to society, like your ancestors, your relationships. So like this is why people like Joe Rogan can't talk about genocide, can't talk about the indigenous people, can't talk about pre-Columbian history, can't talk about the empires that existed before the control grid of today that empowers people by looking at that, by acknowledging that, by knowing that. This information cannot be spoken on. It's this ignorance that exists inside the idea of this quantum cult. And it's people like this individual who are acting as like a truther and all this shit in front of everybody else on YouTube to maintain this limited frame of consciousness that has nothing to do with actually telling a deep truth or really like so-called presenting information to really wake people up. It's only waking people up into another waiting room. They're waking people up to go back to sleep in another waiting room. So this is why like this individual has this whole hope. He's basically promoting this arrogantly ignorant hopelessness. It's like, I've learned everything. I know everything. It's all about this. We just need to come together and do all this shit. That's exactly what this so-called New World Order wants you to think like and be like. Be hopeless. Be a truther. Like talk about chemtrails, talk about the food, talk about like GMOs, talk about all this stuff. But ultimately, be hopeless. Just leave it up to the empire to make the decisions for you. The same way mainstream religions make you leave it up to another savior. So this is like an intellectual version of a mainstream religion. You have no meaning, you have no purpose, you have no responsibility to the Most High, you have no responsibility to your ancestors, you have no responsibility to your soul, you have no responsibility to the future generations, you have no responsibility to the moment right now. You're just hopeless and you have nothing else to say. How fucked up is that?
No point to it. At this point,
when you have individuals who are speaking like this cowardice sort of, oh, there's nothing else to say at this point. I've said everything. There's nothing more to say. What that's doing when you have a lot of followers is that makes other people think that they know everything and they know exactly what's going on, and then they won't have to do anything. They won't take responsibility for themselves. They won't know themselves. They won't go any further than what these people with these followings, no different than celebrities. Celebrities do the same thing. They're out there to play the role like they're beautiful and knowledgeable and rich and successful and all this other stuff. And then you just try to be like Beyonce or try to be like whatever they are based upon how they look. Well, on YouTube and social media, it's not based upon celebrityism and following the mind control. The psychological warfare of that is not based upon looking a certain way. It's based upon thinking a certain way, thinking yourself into a box. And individuals like this represent that. Whether they're doing it consciously or unconsciously, I don't know, and I don't care, because it has the same effect on people. They will be promoted. I'm telling you. Stuff on my channel, and I'm not the only one. My shit is being censored hardcore. Likes are being removed. Views have been removed. Subscribers have been removed. Ultimately, I don't give a shit about that because the information exists. I put it out there and that's all I can do. I can't have any attachments to it. It's just out there and it exists because I've thought about piecing it together. It's like a painting. So I put it out there and I leave it. But I can't help but see how this platform is bringing up bullshit. No different than the trending page. It's televising, amplifying bullshit and coming down hard on people who are expanding the information beyond hopelessness and ignorance. It's a constant like bring this consciousness up and bring this consciousness down.
Every single element of reality that we've looked at closely has turned out to be a complete farce, fraud, faux, fraudulent, bullshit, however you want to call it. So,
as if this individual has looked at every single no, he's only looked at the best of his abilities. just like everybody else, just like me. I'm the same way. But I'm not saying I know it all, or I've found all the answers and there's nothing else to research. Get the fuck out of here. Who the fuck do you think you are?
People, I don't know, I'll call it like level 5. I'm at level 5.
I forgot about this shit. So this level 5 shit, keep in mind this is like New Agers. New Agers do the same thing. They get into this spiritual reality, and they get into the waiting room of spirituality, and then they just sit there. There's no responsibility. There's nothing else after that. They don't have to research. They don't have to be about anything. They just have to regurgitate all the shit that the people around them have been regurgitating, in order to keep themselves comfortable. And the way they keep themselves comfortable is because they are priding themselves in who they weren't, or who they aren't anymore. Who they used to be is a different person. But does that mean that the new person that you are is done growing, is done learning, is done connecting with things that are quite possibly and very much so out of your scope? See, nowadays with social media, you just have to look like a truther. You just have to say shit that is truthful. You don't have to be about anything. You have to push yourself to go beyond that. Like talking about chemtrails, hey, that's a truth. But when you come back and say, oh, well, I can't believe you're talking about racism, are you still a fucking truther? No, your truther card has been revoked.
Not in understanding the nature of it, but in understanding that every single slice of the reality pie is bullshit. Nothing holds water. So once you see...
People like this individual have no foundation. They have no history. They have nothing to stand on but hopelessness and victimization. And when that is their foundation, the only thing that they can do is bring other people down. So he speaks on a video that I shared about Dr. Phil Valentine. This little piece of shit leaves a little funky ass comment on a video pertaining to a teacher that has been speaking, not to put Dr. Phil Valentine up on a pedestal, but to acknowledge and respect that he has been speaking about this information since probably before this dude was even born. Yet these arrogant, this is what social media does, and this little funky ass following on social media does. It creates this false sense of security, this false sense of all-knowing knowledge. And it turns in, the ego then turns that in with the fuel of the following, turns it into this ignorant and arrogant, passive-aggressive approach towards reality. And they can't get out of their own little scope of reality because that is the foundation that they've created from themselves. They don't have anything other than that. So anything or anybody who threatens their comfort zone, their security, they'll be called out or they'll be seen as a threat. So when I asked him, hey, shut the fuck up on this comment section about how racism isn't a thing anymore and talk fucking man-to-man, face-to-face about this shit. You're speaking in reference to a teacher who's been speaking for 30 plus fucking years. And you're talking to me on my channel. This is that sort of, what I say, it's just cowardice.
Or you've gone through this exercise enough, then do we really want to take on and look at the next thing?
I'm speeding this up.
And this matrix is such that there's always a next thing. There's always something to chase. That is the nature of it. That is the nature of this beast. There's always something to tempt us. That is, again...
See, that's the spiral. That's the loop that I was talking about you get into with Flat Earth. Tempting. Information is tempting, and then you stay in that loop. And all of these are loops as tools to learn. So when you don't have a foundation, when you don't have anything to root yourself in, you will become hopeless. You will become empty, and you'll become possibly angry and start to develop perspectives like he's sharing right now. With this, I'm at level 5. Other people are at level 1. This is some new age bullshit. It's the same thing. See, well, and it's not to say that there isn't a difference between people who are like looking at shit and not, but to say that and to wear that shit like a damn cape is counterproductive.
The evidence is overwhelming that this is some sort of matrix, illusion, simulation, quantum fluid reality, whatever. It's
Overwhelming.
Just in
So it's overwhelming. So these are the people who are pushing this simulation theory. This is not to say that I'm not looking at simulation theory. This is to say that I'm not going to accept no bullshit just because it's the like Occam's razor sort of thing. No, it takes more than that. You need to research, you need time, and you need to go into what your ancestors have already done. See, this is what people are avoiding. They're trying to vest all of their time and energy and perspectives in this idea of discovering something. When you don't have any foundations or root systems, you have to think like, or you have to live your life like you fucking discovered something, like you're better than the ancestors, like you're better than like everything else in order to maintain that facade of being like all knowing. And what protects that is the victim. Oh, I'm such a victim. We're all victims. We're all hopeless. We all know it all now. So why don't we just accept like that this is just a simulation? This is why I use this dude as an example right now. Because he's like a low budget Joe Rogan. He's a low budget at best. Like he's the YouTube version of like a amateur Joe Rogan.
Let's look at politics. Oh, it's complete bullshit. Nothing holds water. Presidential elections aren't real. Let's look at 9/11. Oh, of course, official story. Every single page is bullshit. And it's beyond, and you have to go layers after layers after layers. It's not just about military-industrial complex. It's a ritual. Well, let's look into the ritual. There's another door. Let's open it. Alice in Wonderland. Let's shrink ourselves down so we can get through the door. Here's another door. That's all it does. That's what the nature of this reality does. Let's look at chemtrails.
That's the nature of the mind control program, of psychological warfare. It's not the nature of humanity. It's not the nature of our ancestors. It's not the nature of this reality. And individuals like this have not done that research to know that. So they victimize themselves in this loop of bullshit in order to put themselves up on a pedestal against all the other people who aren't on level 5, like he said.
It's a never-ending rabbit hole. We think we get it figured out. There's another element of the story that completely breaks down in terms of reality itself. When truthers originally try to apply real-world standards and metrics to chasing or researching these truth subjects, and you can't do it. It can't be done. These
so-called truthers hold on to truth and the idea, in quotation marks, so-called truth. They hold on to that like flat earthers in the flat earth community hold on to flat earth. They can't let that shit go. If they talk about anything else, it threatens their security. So these truthers who are out there, who are empowered by this synthetic following and this synthetic idea of truth, it's only truth within their own bubble. Like when other truths threaten their truth and their truth bubbles, they got to downplay you. That's what he did when he left that comment on my channel about Dr. Phil Valentine. This is why I'm doing this right now, because there was no response. It was just a, hey, you're wrong and you're just like him. And I'm just going to keep going on about what I'm talking about and sucking people into this hopeless, ignorant sort of mentality of simulation theory. And I know everything about this quantum universe.
Once you open enough doors, it's a reality breakdown. You find that it's behind whatever door, eventually you get to a reality breakdown, where nothing you know of as real makes any sense anymore. So once you've done this 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 times, like I have, you get to the point where you say, why do I even want to go through the next door? What's the new thing being tempted? This is a never-ending maze. It's a never-ending rabbit hole.
The same way politicians can never speak about indigenous America is the same way these so-called truthers cannot talk about racism or white supremacy or all the other things that make them feel uncomfortable. It's the same mentality. It's the same approach. They can't do it because it threatens their version of being a truther. It threatens their version of being, knowledgeable and being like why they should have a following at all. It's threatened. These individuals are doing the same thing. This is the same alchemy as Neil deGrasse Tyson when he goes, oh, flat earth, I'm not even going to entertain such ideas. What the? Same thing Bill Nye does. It's like racism. Oh my goodness. How could you even say such a thing? That doesn't even fit in this. We're talking about real truth. You're talking about racism. That doesn't even exist anymore. Look at the society we're in right now. Look at this technology. We can understand quantum universes. And you're still talking about racism? What? Such poppycock.
Seems like a really nice, genuine guy. But now he's chasing mudfloods. That is the fruit. The truth fruit, the way I would interpret it, that this reality is putting forth. He will then be fascinated by it, do great research, then bring it to us. I highlighted one of his videos a few weeks back. Yeah, why would you build the Palace of Versailles? Watch the movie with Kirsten Dunst, Marie Antoinette. A very, very interesting movie, well done, great music, but great backroom images of Versailles that just blow your mind, how these people lived. You know, bed framed in gold. You know, the gold around the bed is worth millions of dollars by itself. And there's no toilets in Versailles.
Just a regular quantum guy. Non-Jedi, nothing special about me. This is what these individuals, Neil deGrasse Tyson does the same thing. Joe, that's what I said, normal, his version of that. I'm just a regular guy, just a regular Joe, not anything special. All I'm doing is questioning my reality. And then that makes you more comfortable in thinking the same way that they think. And at the end of the day, you don't have to think anymore. They thought everything for you. See, this is the difference between so-called truthers and people who are sharing truthful information. The difference is that attachment that you have when you call yourself a truther and a level 5, whatever the fuck you think it is, what you're doing is that you're telling people how to think, and you're arrogantly and egotistically putting yourself as an authority of reality without humility. Whereas people who are sharing truthful information for the sake of just people thinking for themselves, that's where the detachment comes from. You have to have a detachment from it. This is why I said on the micro and the macro scale. On the micro, if you try to hold on to the world, you'll blow up. You can't. It's not designed to that. On the macro, spiritually, I am ultimately attached to that. Like this is my driving force on the macro, but I don't have any attachments to the macro like that. It's just a thing that I'm aware of, and it helps me come along. Like in the bad times, like it brings me up. In the good times, it motivates me. Whatever that is, I don't know what it is, but I just know that I can't hold on to the whole world. That's not the way that's ignorant. It's arrogant. It's egotistical. It's just ridiculous. And to say you're a level 5, whatever the fuck that is. So that's the difference between what a truther is and somebody who shares truthful information. So-called truthers are people like Alex Jones calling themselves like against the globalists and so on and so forth. The so-called New World Order wants to sell you sell you their version of truthful information from a quantum perspective by not calling themselves truthers, not wearing that cape, but still wearing the cape of scientism and authority. See, when I'm addressing flat earth and racism and all this other shit, I'm addressing authority. The authority to control, the authority to create an empire, the authority of defining your reality, the authority of creating this system of haves and have-nots. That's the authority that I'm talking about. That authority came to be from things like eugenics, so-called white supremacy, racism, genocide, and everything that stems from that. These individuals are not interested in that information because they've bought into the idea that social media has put out there and that scientism has put out there that we should just move on. We're evolved human beings now. Look, we know that the earth is not a globe anymore. We should just move on. We're aware that it's possibly a simulation. We should just move on. Why? Because we know everything now. I don't have anything else to research. I don't have anything else to do. I've done it all. I've said it all.
I don't have whistleblowers. I didn't pop my third eye. I didn't have people like whistleblowers coming to me, like Mr. Beeks, asking me to meet in a dark parking garage.
For him to say, I didn't pop my third eye, it brings down that whole connection and what that all means. The same way he said, he's talking about flat earth, and he's talking about racism and flat earth at the same time. Are you serious? It's all a control grid. This is why a lot of this so-called truth needs to have the stamp of approval by so-called white people. That's a psychological warfare that stems from us, like slaves, not even being allowed to read. Look how far we had to come. This is why. This is the slave uprising. Our ancestors came from being whipped and having their babies fed to alligators, being installed religion to accept slavery as a God-given thing, to not hold the people who are doing these great injustices against humanity and the people and the indigenous people and everybody nowadays as a whole, to dumb them down and say, just wait for a savior, wait for the world to fix itself, wait for the information from the empire to tell you about how to live and how to be. It's hopelessness packaged in this facade of truth. It's bullshit. And they can't go any further than that. Their truth is based upon saying what they're not. So they're not about chemtrails. They're not about GMOs. They're not about vaccines. They're not about Trump. They're not about any other thing out there. They're not about Bohemian Grove. They're not about, the secret society. They're not about the Illuminati. They're not about meat eating. They're not about this. They're not about that. That's what today's modern truther on social media is about. Truth being about what you're not. Truth is not, that's one-sided as truth at best. At best, it's one-sided truth. Because the other side of truth is what you're about. What are you about? When they tell you what you shouldn't be about. When this asshole came onto my video and left that funky ass comment about Dr. Phil Valentine finally speaking up formally about flat earth, he was and tying it into the empire that is a part of racism, a part of racism is a big part of it. For him to downplay that and to say he's not making it about racism, is he? Oh my God. Basically saying, I thought we got over that. That's basically him telling me and Dr. Phil Valentine, you shouldn't be talking about that. You're talking about the wrong truth. We should be talking about the right truth. And I'm a level 5 truther. So this is what we should be talking about. You're just caught up in this blah, 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 blah. See, that's that whole I'm not about this truth. But what are you about? The true empowerment comes from discovering the truth that you're about, that your ancestors were about, your responsibility to your future generations. That's the activated truth it doesn't even need to acknowledge or talk about what you're not about. Eventually, it'll get to that point. Right now, we have to talk about both of them because a lot of people don't know even this shit even exists because they're just sucked into the university creating their truth for them. This individual is doing the exact same thing as the empire. He's building up your belief and your focus in this new world, scientism-based perspective of reality and downplaying your ancestors, downplaying your foundation, downplaying your roots, downplaying the truth that you're about. Why? Because the truth that you're about makes these individuals insecure. It totally destroys their synthetic foundation because it makes them realize that they've been only discovering half truth forever.